Episode of the Demystifying Microsoft podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Taylor. I'm here with the Sourcepass Center of Excellence for Microsoft. And today we are joined by Nick Ross, CEO of Cloud Capsule. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nathan. Always good to chat.
It is always good to chat. And, you had us on your show recently, which was a lot of fun. I know that's about to publish on your side. So a lot of fun kind of collaborating on different stuff, lots of cool stuff to chat about. But today, I'm really looking forward to chatting about token theft and email compromise and business email compromise and phishing. We're seeing a dramatic rise in that even the last couple of weeks across my customer base. And you put some really good content together around this. We've been doing a lot of this work with our clients, and I just wanted to get you on to chat about that. Before we do that, though, tell us a little bit about yourself, the things you're doing, some of your different projects.
Yeah, for sure. Exciting topic for sure. I definitely was hearing a lot of the same, seeing a lot of the same in the sense of the number of attacks in this area. So I'm really excited to unpack that with you. But yeah, I'm Nick. I'm the CEO of Cloud Capsule, which is an automated security assessment tool for Microsoft 365. I'm also a 3-time Microsoft MVP. My background started in the channel with PAX8. And during that time, I started this YouTube channel called T-365, which is all about SMB, MSP, education for Microsoft 365. So I come out with a video every week and blog post. It's just been more of an atomic habit for just educating, shifted into more of a security focus over the past year, just given what we're doing. But it's also, selfishly just like where we get more clicks and a lot of the, search engines and things like that as well. So, but yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Well, we use the heck out of your tool. I'm rocking my Cloud Capsule shirt today.
That.
Been running it with a lot of customers. Customers are loving it. So it's part of our 365 security assessment process, and we drive a lot of customer improvement out of it. And it answers a common question our customers have, which is, what is my security posture? Are all the things turned on? I got this amazing Microsoft license that has all these features. Are they enabled? Incredible tool. We love it. Reach out to us if you'd like us to help you run it. But very grateful for your tool and all the work you put in there. And your content is some of the best. Your T-365 content's incredible. You do an amazing job of just sharing great content. Check out his blog. Check out the YouTube channel. And today we're going to actually go through content you've spent a lot of time on in the last couple of weeks. We're really rehashing stuff that you've done a couple videos and a couple blog articles on. And that is just this rise in phishing emails, which we've had for 5 or 6 years, right? This is not new. This idea of stealing credentials or stealing passwords, that's been around for a long time. We've been fighting with the MFA battle for a long time. A lot of customers have figured it out. There's still a lot of customers who are really, resistant for various reasons. But we're finding that there's a new thing that the nerds have been talking about for a couple of years that is now being seen in the wild regularly. And that's this idea of token theft. So talk us through what token theft is, what's new about it, what does it look like, and why are we seeing more of it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, I did a webinar on this just to give some context, just to have set the stage. And it was, one of the most popular webinars I've done with over 250 people coming to that webinar. But I asked a simple question, just upon registration, which was, how many of you have had yourself or a customer, fall susceptible to a token theft breach in the past year? And 51% of the registrants said they had. And I built that question because almost every week, I got on a call with another MSP who was going through that with their customers as well too. But token theft can be, or really can occur in multiple different forms. But the most prevalent that we see today is kind of an extension of this phishing email where somebody gets a link to go to what looks like a Microsoft login page. And so, the URL won't be the exact one that you would want to have or do have that's legitimate, but oftentimes that's often overlooked from the user. And they're just focusing in on, this is a familiar login page that I typically put my Microsoft credentials into. And the big difference between traditional phishing, that could be prevented with MFA, as an example, is that when the user goes through this flow, they are putting in their username, their password, and fulfilling an MFA request, but then being redirected back to their Microsoft login page. So it appears as if nothing happened. They don't know anything occurred, and behind the scenes, the attacker's using, software or infrastructure such as Evil Jinx, which is a token harvesting engine that you can use and put different, types of simulation. It doesn't have to be related to Microsoft. We're just seeing that the most. And they're able to actually host and harvest the username, the password, and the session token. So the session replay event is what occurs when the attacker puts in the session cookies into a browser using a basic plugin. I showed all this on that video, kind of walking through Evil Jinx and how easy it is. And I think that was the biggest thing that everybody took away, which is like, that was so easy, for a user to click on a link that looks like it's coming from a legitimate user in the organization or externally, whatever it might be. And then the attacker just entering the account, seemingly, without any bells or whistles, any friction whatsoever. So it's pretty powerful, and it overcomes, your basic MFA that you'd have on your account too.
Right. So in basic, even your 6-digit rotating code, your authenticator app with the 2-digit, verification, it's able to get you to authenticate it for it. So it's able to get a full authentication process through. And what happens? What can they do with that token? What is that token?
Yeah, it's an active session for that user. So in a lot of cases, it depends on who they compromise, right? They can go in, and typically they're going to try to set up some type of persistence, to maintain access to that account, because they know like the user's password might change, or the session will only live for so long. So they have to have a way to, be able to get back into the account, from those methods. So they'll often go in and basically set up another form of MFA, like their own authenticator app or their own text message, if they can do that, so they can maintain that level of access over time. Or they might do things like register another device to be seen as trusted on the network, things like that. And then usually post that, they start to try to extend that campaign, right? In a lot of cases, we see them set up inbox rules to start some type of campaign around, hiding their presence, anything that they did to phish the user, hiding that email they sent over. But then also getting into, trying to campaign in the sense of phishing other users in the organization. And usually their motives are data exfiltration, wire fraud, getting somebody or tricking somebody to send money outside. That's the one I see most commonly, where people are wiring out money to another bank, and they're impersonating like a supplier or a controller, as an example for that.
Yep. They're always looking for the money, right? They're always trying to get to an easy way to get cash. And if that user doesn't have access to that workflow, then they use that user to attack other users that will. They try to get a lay of the land and find the people handling payments, that sort of thing, and send them a phishing link from a more trusted source than some external source. So they can definitely go lateral as well. That token, I think a good illustration is maybe like a hotel key card. You walk to the front desk, they want to see a credit card and an ID. That's multi-factor, right? They get your driver's license, something that validates you are who you are, and then a credit card. You're willing to put money on the line. Maybe they check the name, maybe they don't. Then they hand you a hotel key. You don't get authenticated again in that hotel. Yep. And that's the same way that token. It's basically an ability to open the door a couple of times. Now, if you have policies in place, maybe that, like you said, that key maybe only works for a day or something. So then they try to find another way to get persistence. But that's the idea behind stealing that token. Is it's the authentication digital key to get in that account for a period of time. Yeah. And we've been seeing these man in the middle kind of token stealing attacks in security demonstrations for probably 2 to 3 years. Matt Lee's been doing them for a while, and Dom Kirby and a few others have been showing us those. But they went from something that was theoretical 2 years ago to I heard about them rarely a year ago to I'm hearing about them all over the place right now. And then we go look and start reviewing logs, and the logs are really interesting because instead of the traditional MFA where you're seeing fail, success from China, right? Like you can kind of watch the chain of a standard phishing attack where maybe they get the password and then they badger the user into giving them an MFA token, or they find a way to get in. And in the event logs, you can see kind of that chain. In these token stealing, it's success. Like it's just another login. And, it doesn't even trigger the failure side of things where you can even see that. It's just a simple, clean, successful MFA login.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, normally we also saw those sign-ins occur if they did get breached from other countries and things like that. Whereas I stood up the Evil Jinx infrastructure in under an hour, and I used a droplet, in DigitalOcean, which is just a hosting platform for those who don't know that. But I was able to stand up infrastructure in the U.S. So I could get a U.S. IP,
Yeah.
and I spun that up and was able to create a lure, which is a link, that I generated against the domain that I had already possession of. And whenever I simulated that and logged into that account with the user, the infrastructure that I was logging in with, or that the user logs in with, that I stood up was part of Evil Jinx, was a US based IP. And in my case, I'm out in Denver, Colorado. It was signing in from I think North Glen, which is just north of where I'm at. And so it didn't even detect Microsoft's, capabilities of anonymous sign-in. Wasn't even like, that's suspicious, because it was so close in proximity. And I've
Right.
simulated it a lot. Sometimes it's coming from Texas, sometimes it's coming from California. So you can get a little bit of a variance, and you might get alerted. But in this case, it also did its automated investigation and said, no, we think this is a false positive,
Right.
even for
Because
that type of
it's
incident.
an authenticated login with the authenticator app. So that's one of the
Yeah.
variables that say this is less likely to be anomalous because it's fully authenticated. It wasn't, it's not just a password and username from another state.
Yeah.
There's extra details there. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about prevention, because I think that's where we got to land is okay. These attacks are happening. How do we help our customers prevent? And I want to get to some of the technical stuff on the back end, but one of the things I'm seeing a lot of is um, that email filtering is actually a weak link now for a lot of customers. And there's a couple interesting things I picked up on. So talk about some of the email filtering technologies we can enable on the Microsoft side that can help to start to prevent that. And then I want to talk through one of the things I'm seeing in that area.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. So, with Business Premium, I'm always going to try to speak to that just because it has a really great security suite. Defender for Office 365 comes as part of that, which is your more advanced email security than you get
Yep.
with a basic Exchange Online protection plan. With the lower tier plans, but effectively that comes out with some more advanced configurations for things like anti-phishing policies, as well as your anti-spam configuration. And whenever you're going through and setting that up, you can tune it, for both domain impersonation considerations, as well as targeted impersonations. People trying to
Mhm.
impersonate CEOs, controllers. And adding those for additional protections. Which you also get access into things like safe links, as an example, which can do URL detonation for those fake links that are being usually masked. The example I showed was a user, and we see this, a lot, where they got an email that looked like a OneDrive email of a user sharing a file with you, and it's completely, they just copy the CSS, right? Like it looks exactly like you
Right.
would see coming from Microsoft. But that link in there, has that URL detonation, and in some cases it'll prevent it, in some cases it won't.
Right.
But this is defense in depth talk about kind of
Yeah.
that layered protection. But on top of that, you also have ZAP protections, or zero hour auto purge capabilities, all the acronyms from Microsoft. But effectively, that would allow you, if it does detect something as malicious, where an attacker spread a campaign out to multiple users in your organization, it could actually remove those other emails from those inboxes. So you're just kind of quickly responding and removing things automated fashion, versus having to sift through, the email flow or a message trace to try to figure out where these things came from.
Yeah, it's a great technology. We do a lot of Defender for Office 365. I love the products. Works really well. I'm finding two interesting gaps right now from a lot of my customers in that stack on the email flow inbound. One is a lot of people still have a third party MX based filter in front of their systems. They're
Yeah.
running a Proofpoint, a Mimecast, a Pawbox, any number of these different MX record based filtering or maybe HIPAA control tools where your mail flows through their servers and then it gets sent to you. And 20 years ago, I mean, that's where MX Logic came from. That's what we did, right? That's the way you built email filters 15 years ago, 10 years ago. But there's a real problem with it right now, which is you're effectively breaking a lot of the email security functions on email sent to you, because Proofpoint now is the source for all your emails. So I get an email from Nick. He doesn't have Proofpoint on his SPF as an approved sender, but it goes through my Proofpoint server and then I get it. And Microsoft gets no data about the sending IP. It doesn't get to fully check the security, the TLS, the DKIM key gets broken because the chain of custody is broken. There's extra header information. And I'm seeing on multiple customers where I think that ability of Defender for Office 365 to really understand the mail flow is severely disruptive when you're running your mail intentionally through somebody else first. That other mail filter better be really good because Microsoft's getting a lot less data and can do a lot less. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but we're seeing like actually legitimate problems with like also DKIM signing, like inbound emails just aren't correct because of that extra hop in the way.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've seen, obviously I've definitely seen the same, and I think there's a big emphasis on, you know, getting the total stack with Microsoft in the sense of the machine learning that's going on through them getting all these signals, not just from your tenant, but from everywhere, where in my use case of testing, right, in the sense of this token theft, it actually picked up on my domain name being part of that Lure URL that I had registered, and it flagged it as malicious. So if I try to go in and do it into another tenant, it prevented the email from coming through altogether, versus the first use case, the email came through, the user clicked on it. It then determined, you know, the site to be malicious infrastructure, and it shut it down with the attack surface or the attack disruption capabilities. So it's also that defense in depth to say, like, they're getting all these signals that, you know, are coming through. I certainly have seen the other side where we've seen blatant phishing emails get through, you know, Defender for Office 365, and that's all they had, even with the tightest tuned settings that you could potentially get within there. So I hear when people are like, we saw this one thing came through and we basically lost trust in the solution and moved to a Proofpoint or an Avanon, you know, or these other solutions here that are more popular. But I think that's where it's like, well, you know, the email may come through, but then you have these other 6 protections, right, that we're trying to put into place that would continue on in that attack chain that the attacker is, you know, trying to actually breach the account on.
Right. And I think my perspective on it is, I love having a second layer of defense. I think it's a really good idea to have a second set of eyes. Proofpoint's going to have a different set of heuristics than Microsoft. There's value in that. It's worth investigating if you're using a third party. Do they have an API-based version? So, for example, like an IronScales uses the API. So Microsoft gets all the data, and then IronScales goes and looks at your data. I know Proofpoint and Mimecast, and I believe Avanon, I think they all have an API-based version. It's just not always deployed that way. And it's worth thinking through the consequences of giving them your MX record instead of using the API version. And with each tool, you'll have to look through the pros and cons. But I think these days, my opinion is you're causing fundamental issues with the infrastructure we're building, DKIM, MTA, STS, all these new advanced technologies for really authenticating mail flow. Putting a filter in your MX flow is going to be detrimental to that. And I think it's better to lean on APIs for third party. So get off my soapbox, but that's just something I'm seeing. The other one I'm seeing is I'm seeing a lot of these emails coming through as spoof domains. So people are sending themselves these. That's a really common tactic I hadn't seen before, and you would think it would be easy to disrupt, but I'm finding it's getting through the filters pretty regularly, and I think that's interesting. And there's a chain of thought on that, but I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, seeing that, I think, you know, the spoof domains is definitely something where we also see, in combination of that, people have a lot of these settings for external sender warnings and, you know, kind of the warning messages. Not that, you know,
tips.
all that users are going to look at that, right? Like, they're pretty tunnel vision in some cases overseeing that, but it's an extra, you know, layer there to help out in those use cases. And certainly, you know, from the spoof domain aspect, you can try to add, you know, your own internal domains, but also custom domains of your suppliers that you work most heavily with and things like that as well too. But yeah, certainly, you know, a heavy mix of that, or even, you know, getting into domains that aren't newly registered or parked, you know, in that sense, where we could use DNS filtering in some cases, or web content filtering in Defender to try to prevent them because they might have bought them months ago and they've just been sitting on a bunch of random domains that look a little bit like Microsoft or non-malicious or whatever it might be. Just given it needs to be just a little bit, not out of the ballpark, right? If a user does look in the URL.
Yep. No, for sure. I think the thing I'm seeing also is that for most of these people who are getting spoofed domains, they don't have their DMARC moved to a quarantine or reject setting. It's work to get there. You need to do reporting. You really have to drive on that. I think a lot of people are starting to get DMARC records, but they're setting them to none just to get to the base level of recommendation. And none's great. I mean, it's better than nothing. But the reality is, if you're getting spoofed, I think you have to push hard to get to the quarantine stage and say, I got to at least give even Microsoft the recommendation that if it doesn't pass SPF or DKIM, even Microsoft will honor that DMARC tag. And I think right now, most people just don't have that dialed in, and it's becoming really important, not for external purposes, but for people spoofing yourself. So that's a little tip I'm kind of starting to pick up on pretty regularly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the other stuff that's maybe a little bit more fun, the really cool technologies we have in the Microsoft stack to really disrupt this kill chain. And you've got 2 great articles on this. You've got a token theft disrupt the kill chain article on T-365 and the token theft playbook. I'll show those here in a second, but talk us through some of the controls we can use to really get ahead of this. There's as you said, defense in depth, layers of security. It's much better when we have multiple things. We've dialed in our email flow. What are some of the things we can look at next to really dial this in?
Yeah, I think, what I see a lot of in the space are just, more communicated, right, in the MSP Reddit or, some of these forums where people are talking about this. It's usually too big of an attention focus on post-breach mitigation. So I need an alerting tool to tell me when, John has been breached and he's signing in from, Japan now. And it's fair in the sense that you do obviously want to be able to quickly mitigate breach, and that's why people go out and buy tools like Huntress, for their IDTR protections to have more of that 24/7 monitoring. But I think that kind of diverts your focus too far away from what can you do to actually prevent this from happening altogether. So you're not getting a call at 2:00 in the morning saying this user's breached, and things like that. And certainly that's, I'm not saying by putting in these protections, you're never going to have that happen. But it's just the drive of focus on, well, what could we done, to prevent this? And I think for this type of attack today, what I showed in the proactive protections was really around some of the conditional access policies you could get into. And, I basically tiered them against how realistic I feel like you can get into, because some of them require a certain level of maturity. They require, a lot of things to be in place already at the organization, such as, having managed devices, right, that you're using to sign in with as a great example. But to that point, that's a great policy. If you require just a managed device or compliant device in, Microsoft, if you're using Intune, that will actually disrupt the kill chain when somebody actually clicks on a link and goes to the Evil Jinx infrastructure and tries to sign in. It will say your sign-in was successful, but doesn't meet the criteria to access this resource, because it sees the infrastructure as being something different than a managed device trying to get in. And so, it wouldn't prevent, not to get too much into the weeds, it wouldn't prevent like a token replay event. Let's say they harvested this token through other methods that are less common, like a malicious browser extension, or, the attacker got and downloaded malware onto your device and was able to harvest your token from the browser. There's other ways in which this could happen, not, the volume we're seeing, like the phishing workflow and the man-in-the-middle infrastructure in that sense, but it would prevent that type of attack and breaking them down from initially harvesting, that token, which is going to stop a lot, in your ecosystem from just that alone. And that is included in, P1 licensing that you get with Business Premium. So it's a really great win. And then as you step up through these protections, there's considerations for phishing resistant MFA, that would prevent that type of attack, where you might be using a FIDO2 key or Windows Hello for Business as an example. And then kind of shifting into, there you go, shifting into some of the other things that Microsoft has that you may not have even known is in P1, like global secure access, kind of their SASE ZTNA solution for having a connection, that's a secure traffic port for Microsoft traffic. And that actually prevents, things from being locked down too. So there's still ways you can do this where you don't have to be saying, we really need everything to be locked down back down to a firewall layer, right? At the same time, for this traffic to come through. So those are some of the initial ones. And then that disrupt the kill chain was more around, okay, if they did get past layer one, based off of what we see most commonly of what they do next, how can we think about, preventing them from maintaining persistence, preventing them from creating an internal campaign, and so on and so forth. So you have plenty of attempts to block them before the, wire fraud occurs, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back through a couple of those things you mentioned and share a couple thoughts. So the managed device one is more approachable than people think.
Yeah.
Getting to compliant device can be a lot of work, right? If you're not fully intra joined, you're not Intune managed, there's a lot of infrastructure to build there, a lot of workstations to touch, that sort of thing. And the reality is a lot of customers are still on on-prem AD, right? They haven't made that migration to modern. They're not intra joined, Intune managed. So it becomes like, well, what do I do now? Well, you have in your article, you can filter to intra-joined or intra-registered. And intra-registered is good, but the interesting thing about intra-registered is it's a little easier to get that. That's a little easier hill to get over. The other way you can do managed devices if you're on-prem is you can actually set that filter to require hybrid joined. And hybrid joined is actually pretty easy to do with Azure AD Connect and your on-prem services. You just sync your devices, and all of a sudden your devices that are on-prem AD are a different class of machine to cloud conditional access. And so it is able to enforce that hybrid joined, and you're able to quickly get through this without having to get the whole move to intra, have compliant devices, get everything actually joined. Most of those devices will also be registered, but I think the hybrid join is harder to get to than registered from just a technical execution perspective. And so it's actually pretty easy to get that one going in most environments. You're either already intra joined, which gives you some clean filters, or you can do that hybrid join. Maybe the intra registered is kind of your third tier, but you really can start to filter on Windows devices. These are the rules for how you're going to get it, and I'm going to reject you if you don't cover that. So I think that's a great step just to kind of clean things up.
Yeah, and I think if you zoom out on that, it's thinking, if you don't know, or if you leave it at the default settings where, any user can sign in on any device anywhere in the world by default in Microsoft, if you're at that state, that's probably a bigger concern, right? Of your holistic security versus this one channel token theft type of workflow that we see very often. So it's like, it's a great win in many different areas if you get devices, managed and lockdown access. In a lot of those ways. And I think a lot of people, to your point there, it's either a much shorter journey than thinking about something like, I'm going to roll out FIDO2 keys and I'm going to invest in FIDO2 keys where I know it's a lot of money, to get that rolled out. Number one, end user friction, just to get use case and training, and then people losing them, right? So it's like you have to have a backup login. You got to have a way to logistically give them a new key. And it's the physical layer that, gets cumbersome. So there's a lot of friction there. Whereas, with just managed devices, a lot of us are already in that state where we have locked it down, at least to that first layer. And it's just like, hey, well, why don't you just turn on this policy? It could disrupt some workflows, and you got to be careful always when you roll these things out. But I think it's just, very achievable to look at this, attack we see growing rapidly. And have some initial protections for it.
Yeah. And this always comes down to then the minor details that make a big difference. Do you require MFA to register a new device? That's one of those settings that's not always enabled. That makes a huge difference, because if somebody does steal a token, they go to register a new device, they've got to re-authenticate. You've now invalidated that, that pivot. They can't go that direction. So I think those are really key things. You talked about the FIDO2 keys. So, from my perspective, these YubiKeys, yeah, 25 to $50 a user. That's a cost. I agree with you. There's some friction getting people to use them, to remember a password on them because they need a PIN number. Plug them in. They're the login flow can be clunkier, right? You can have more issues because it's got to interact with Windows, and Windows has got to talk to the USB. But Microsoft just came out with the new authenticator-based passkeys, which are also FIDO2 compliant and are a virtual version of this. There's a lot less to move. Most people aren't going to lose their phone. They probably already have Authenticator app on there for your authentication flow. You're just creating a FIDO2 login through that passkey. And that's a big improvement over the standard Authenticator flow. So talk me through your experience with passkeys and your thoughts on it through the Microsoft Authenticator app.
Yeah, I posted an article about this too, but Microsoft spent a lot of time on the UX and UI, and I think that's regardless of security, like that's the next big focus because we're as secure as you make this thing, if nobody adopts it, then you're not really accomplishing anything at all at the end of the day. But I think they've definitely iterated a lot since its initial inception because it's gotten a lot better in the user experience. I think it's still a little bit clunky from what users are experienced to because they basically have to take out their camera and take a screenshot of this QR code that pops up every time they sign in, for their session. But it does provide those additional protections that's phishing resistant for more than token theft, in this particular case, as an example. And, it loses the overhead cost, of purchasing the physical keys, the overhead that I was mentioning to you on users are naturally going to lose that key. And you have to replace it and have to reset up their MFA and all those types of things. So I think it's a huge win. And I love to see that continue to iterate where, it gets more and more seamless for them to go through that because the actual onboarding of that workflow was pretty easy. I think it's comparatively speaking to some of the things you have to do, even with that physical FIDO2 key or the YubiKey. It's like, hey, do this, and this is now on your device. You've got a passkey. And so it was a lot smoother in that regard. I just think the actual authentication for people, especially coming from the traditional, MFA is such a pain in my butt, every time I have to do this. So now you have to pull out your camera, scan the app, and then work through a workflow. It seems hard, for us that are more security conscious and focused, it's like, it's not a big deal, right? But for the average user you're talking to, it's going to still be a point of friction.
Well, and I think it's really important to start thinking of security in scenarios, right? Your admins. If you got admins on a tenant, they should be using a FIDO key, and then probably not the pass key. I would say the physical key is impossible to beat from a security perspective, right? It makes a big difference. So your admin accounts, they should require FIDO2 keys. Buy 2 of them for every engineer, right? Like everybody who has admin access, if you're going to really rely on FIDO keys and they're important people, have them have 2 keys, one in the backpack and one on the keychain. However they want to do it, give them a backup. But that becomes, it's really hard to beat a FIDO key from a security perspective. It's one of the hardest things to defeat. Whereas even the Authenticator app is a step down because it can be synced to another device. It can be, maybe your device can be compromised. It's not so much something I'm physically holding and have to touch. There's still a really great level of protection, and it's still got the FIDO standard. So you're getting that phishing resistant, much less vulnerable to the man in the middle attack method. So I think those passkeys on the phone are great. I think a lot of businesses need to think through the risk level of their employees, admins, executives, finance people controlling important decisions around money. And I'm sorry, you guys are gonna have to just deal with the additional security of a physical key or a passkey on your phone. I know it's disruptive, and it's worth the $500,000 we're not going to lose for you to be disrupted a couple times a week. I always think it's important to call out, don't forget Windows Hello for Business. If you're running Windows 11, you're intro joined, check that box in the Intune portal, because that actually makes the logins from your Windows device FIDO2 compliant when it's authenticating you to a site. It's using that full flow from your biometric authentication, your PIN number authentication. I think it's still better to have the FIDO2 key, but it is a FIDO2 login and really makes a lot of your logins from corporate devices that much more secure to have Windows Hello for Business running. Don't forget to install your Chrome extensions. Those definitely help that. Most people are using Chrome, and that extension really makes that flow better. But I think the FIDO thing is we're going to see a lot of people leaning into that. But if we can build layers here, right? You've got better protection on your phishing. You've locked in your DMARC. You're now requiring managed devices. On the managed devices front, you really want to look at a mobile application management policy where you're requiring the Microsoft apps on mobile devices to eliminate some of the variables there, of requiring a more secure mobile device and a managed, application. Get your FIDO2. You're now making it very difficult to to really drive, get into an environment. There's going to be, they're going to get through one blocker and they're going to get the next one, right? Oh, I was able to steal that FIDO token, but my device is not trusted, or whatever the layers are, right? They're able, you've got a chance of catching it on the next layer. I think the last two you had on there was, requiring trusted locations, which is pretty similar to the idea of, like you said, that global secure access, that always on VPN where you're authenticating kind of the connection itself. Talk us through the value on those.
Yeah, I think the trusted locations and the global secure access, I like a little bit better because it allows you to be flexible, where people are logging in from without having to create a lot of overhead, like them signing in with a VPN or things like that. You just need the agent active on their device in order for that to happen. It's smooth, for how early that product is. It's very complete in the sense of not really having any bugs and working as productized, which you can't say always with Microsoft stuff that just comes out, as is in preview. So I think, the benefit there being if you are already a organization that has a physical presence, has a physical network that you're logging into, going to the office and doing that, it could be a good way to keep things locked down. A great example is regulatory, companies like hospitals is probably a great example of, you're going to be going into the hospital and you're going to be signing in on a trusted network, and we're going to lock things down at the building, even as an example of that, versus a remote workforce that's all over the world and needs more accessibility with things like GSA. The big benefit with GSA and the trusted networks is it also helps prevent the token replay event. So if it is harvested in other methods, it would actually prevent the token replay because it's got that disruption at the location layer that would stop that attack from occurring too.
That's brilliant. And I've seen some people use some of these functionalities to get around other blockers. I know of a customer where they've got shop floor workers who got to get into email, and just MFA token is just not going to be a part of their workflow. They're not carrying a keychain. They don't have a phone. They're on the shop floor working, but they got to get into email. And so they set a rule that said for this very small subset of their users, they're not required to have MFA, but the only place they're ever allowed to log in from is the public IPs of that shop. Mm-hmm. And so they're really able to say, hey, I don't have MFA on these users, but I have a compensating control where I have a lot of confidence. And they're also low risk users, right? Okay, you got a shop person's computer. They're probably not dealing with invoices. They're probably not dealing with paychecks or PII. So there's a lot of layers of sensitivity there, but those additional layers of kind of location-based access are great. The other advantage of turning on trusted locations is I think it gives the backend heuristics additional data. It knows where your office is, knows that, and things outside of it, I think, automatically get classified as less trustworthy. And so you're just giving the algorithms more data, which I think is always a thing to think about. Can I give more and more data points for the filters to be able to say, this is anomalous because almost everything happens based on these consistent patterns, and this is outside the pattern. And I think that pattern recognition, especially as we get more and more AI into how Microsoft's defending us, like giving it patterns it can find by defining what's trusted and making sure these workflows work one way, you're going to get a higher likelihood you're going to catch it when it's not in that pattern.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Well, let's go to the post breach, and I appreciate you taking time with us. It's a little longer episode, but the post breach, there's a couple really key things. We talked about one earlier, is you're requiring MFA to register those devices. And I think that's one of those, it's an easy checkbox to miss, but it's part of that attack pivot. So talk through what somebody would be doing there and how that MFA, prompt kind of derails it.
Yeah. So, those persistence techniques, they're going to try to do a few things, like that secondary method of a multi-factor, because in that evil jinx workflow with the infrastructure, they've harvested your password, So no matter what, in any of these incidences, you always want to reset passwords, rotate sessions, everything like that, and even block the user account until you understand the scope of what's going on. But that MFA registration, requiring an MFA to register another method, is going to prevent them from actually changing anything on that security page that they can get to with the information of the user. And, you have to support it with workflows like a temporary access pass, right? For like a new user onboarding, how do they set up their MFA for the first time? You have to have that in place in order for that to work cohesively, right? Or temporarily exclude them from that policy, which is what I wouldn't do, as much as trying to use a tap, because it's a little bit more approved workflow versus creating a bunch of exclusions you might forget about
Yeah.
in the future with your policy. So between that and there's, other methods that they use persistence on, like registering an app registration or enterprise app, which has its own set of permissions. It's its own identity. And there's some protections around, preventing that as well too.
Yeah. Those enterprise apps are a really common pivot we're seeing now, right? Where they go, hey, I'm going to immediately get an API. Because the other advantage for the attackers is once they get that API connection, that OAuth app, it's no
Mhm.
longer in the event logs. And a lot of IT guys just go to that audit log and they go, hey, I see the logins. Oh, they stopped. Great. We got them out. Like, yep, you got us out. We're not here anymore. But they're actually have full mailbox access over the API. And it doesn't show up in the logs anymore. And so it's really important that you remove those default settings. It's one of the things I wish Microsoft had dealt with earlier. The default is just too low on those app registration rules. I think Microsoft wanted people to adopt the OAuth standard and really connect things into Microsoft, but it really puts a lot of tenants in a bad spot where any user can connect any app to their mailbox without approval. It's just not a good place to be because they don't think through. They just go, yeah, get me through. I gotta get back to work.
Yeah, and they're changing that now to change the default in new tenants, to not have it registered, which is great. It's all comes back to that same statement around they're built for productivity by default, not security, right? Around just keeping things open. They don't want you to inhibit your experience in that regard. But in Cloud Capsule, we also see about 10% of all tenants that are connected have a rogue application in them. So it's a very high percentage for what it is, which is, when I say rogue app, I mean traderware is another term a lot of people use for this, which is like your perfect data, your EM client, your cloud sponge. These are legitimate applications used in nefarious purposes. Like EM client can be used to download somebody's entire inbox after they get access to it. It can be used to send email on behalf of the user. So they
Right.
can get into your account in the front end, like they're logging in with your credentials, but then just set up the EM client and programmatically send emails to other users in the organization. And at the very largest scale, we see them do that, in mass, where they're sending out a whole new campaign, thousands of emails to not just your organization, but all of the contacts, right, in your portfolio of people that they see within there. So it's it's pretty wild to see the number of those that are being set up too.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, so let's do the final topic here, and then we'll move on, which is the advanced capabilities, right? So where we've been talking about stuff we can do, everything we talked about so far, which is great, is in Business Premium, our favorite SKU, credible value, credible security capabilities. They even added that token protection capability recently. They just continue to add features to it. But you're at a place where you really want to take it to the next level. $22 a month for Business Premium, 57 6 or $60 a month for E5. How do I jump up to that P2 license, that intra ID P2 license that adds a lot of the automated attack disruption? But that's a $9 license. What are some of the new options we have for getting some of those protections in place?
Yeah, so recently in the past few months, Microsoft introduced the E5 security add-on, as part of something you can now bolt on to Business Premium, which is a huge win because it's $12 a user, so it's $3 additional than you would have to spend for the P2, which is now included. But you also get, Defender for Office 365 Plan 2. You get the full Cloud App Discovery, Defender for Cloud Apps as part of that. You're getting, additionally the Defender for Endpoint Plan 2. So you're getting this wide variety of new security features, which are very powerful, at your disposals, not just some of the more of the advanced telemetry, some of the policies you get, in P2 too, to do, attack disruption. So like if a user is detected as high risk from their sign-ins or their activity, you can actually block their access immediately, without needing to do that yourself or, get into the weeds on that as well. So there's a lot of, powerful features that you can step up into, especially if you're an organization that's gone through a breach or, has additional regulatory compliance to deal with or has a higher propensity of this happening and wants to reduce their risk quite a bit. and starting to look at that SKU as potentially, getting a wide variety of security features that all talk to each other. That's part of the automatic attack disruption was actually included in business premium as well too. But you get, more of these signals coming through your applications that you're accessing, your users, the devices, and having that kind of do that automated investigation for you is like having, a 24/7 SOC that's just inclusive, that's responding faster than a human analyst would in those use cases. So it's doing a lot of the groundwork for you. And I was even shocked. I was in a tenant the other day, that had, somebody was sending a lot of emails out, and it did a full investigation of like, did they create inbox rules? Did they, hit external suppliers? Did they do this? And it was like this full checklist of things that it went through. And it was like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize like how many checks it was performing in that use case.
Yeah. Well, I think Microsoft's putting a lot of effort into putting AI into these things, right? Automating it. We don't have access to the security copilot yet in the small business space, but I think they're taking the lessons and taking the easier to, productize little parts and putting it down lower. And I think you're going to see those show up in the E5 SKU pretty consistently on that. E5 add-ons, incredible add-on. We can put it on O365 E3 or Business Premium or M365 E3. Even if you're on M365 E3, one of the gaps I see on that product compared to Business Premium is it doesn't have Defender for Office 365. Well, you put on this E5 add-on, you're still at, $44 a month, approximately 45, 46, depending on how you're licensing, as opposed to 60 for E5. So you're still getting that security layer, and it adds P1 and P2 for Office 365 with that add-on, which E3 has neither. So really, really a lot of opportunity to drive some stuff there. You've got a great article on your website on the blog on T-365 about attacks. You got a token theft playbook, incident response, great content there. So really valuable to help people understand what to do when it does happen. And I think there's some really subtle details you've called out that are important to call out that even those of us in the industry forget about, right? Just we kind of go through and reset passwords and reset MFA and, think, okay, well, I think we got it. So a lot of great stuff. Looks like Nicole, who is helping us out with the show today, producing it for us, says there's some questions. Keith Moe, is it still a good idea of having a third-party API to also scan? So I think that's probably back to our conversation about, the proof points, the MIME caps, iron scales. I love having a third party on there. I mean, I think whether it's on the email filter where it's using an API to go do a second check on your email, or it's even having a third party in the form of like a Huntress running on the Defender side. Having a second set of heuristics, a non-Microsoft generated set of rules has some value because they may see something Microsoft's team doesn't see yet. So I think it is great if you've got that tool. I just recommend not having it run your MX record. Just a personal preference that I think is gonna start to become a common issue is those MX record changes are just gonna break more and more as we get into DMARC and DKIM and MTSTS and TLS RPT and DANE for DNSX and all these advanced email filters that Microsoft's giving us capability to do. Microsoft not being your MX record breaks them all. And so I think it's important to call it out. From Blake, $3 uplift from Business Premium for P2 entitlements. Yeah, let's clarify that. So $3. So if you're on Business Premium, to add the Defender for Intra ID P2, let me get my words right, Intra ID P2, which has a lot of the automated account cleanup and attack disruption capabilities, that's a $9 SKU. So that's a $9 add-on. To get the full E5 security add-on is $12. So we're saying it's $3 more than the one license. So you're taking your $22 Business Premium and going to $34 for the E5 add-on, but you get a lot more capability than just bumping it up by $9. So appreciate the question and the clarification. Nicole, we'll look for any further ones. I'm going to show your website real quick. Nick, just show it on the screen here, and encourage everybody to go check it out. You got some great content here. So this is a lot of what we talked about today is built out here on the site, and my scroller's not happy. A lot of what we talked through is we were really talking through these amazing articles you wrote already. Great content here with pictures and step-by-step guides on how to implement all this stuff. how to dig through it. You got your token theft incident response playbook here. Of course, you got your great YouTube channel, which has incredible content. I think your monthly What's New in Microsoft is some of the best content on the internet for keeping up with Microsoft, because there's always moving stuff there. Best outside of our podcast, of course. But
yeah, of course. Yes.
But lots of great content here to go through. And of course, your Cloud Capsule product, which is at cloudcapsule.io. Is that correct?
Yep.
We use the heck out of that. That product is incredible for just doing assessments on Office 365. We can walk you through it. We can help you navigate it, but it's also available as a tool you guys can sign up for. One of the best tools to come along in a long time. And Nick, we really appreciate you jumping on the call today. It's always fun to chat with you. I appreciate you going kind of deep and nerdy. This is almost an hour we've been digging into this, and you've been hanging in there for all the really nerdy conversation, but super helpful. Your knowledge is second to none in the industry, and just your willingness to kind of consolidate all this information into simple articles that help us understand it. I find it valuable, even as somebody who knows a lot of this stuff. You consolidate it into form that's really consumable. So thank you.
Well, really appreciate it, man. Yeah. Obviously we've known each other for many, many years, and I was learning from you in the early days of PAX8. So it's been a mutual ecosystem in that regard, but appreciate having me on. I always love these talks. It's good to get nerd out a little bit on this, and also just kind of share the awareness of everything that's out there, because it's not like it's at your fingertips in all of these ways, which is why I like to spend the time, to do that as well.
Well, and it is intimidating stuff. You're like, all right, I'm going to go turn on compliant devices. Well, that's a big lift. Breaking it down and saying, hey, there's some different ways to attack this, and maybe phase this in is really helpful. And somebody going through and say, this is how you do it, and this is what you can see is so valuable. So thank you for your time. Stay tuned on the podcast. I'm excited about the next couple of episodes. Next week, I've got Dom Kirby coming in, and we're going to talk about, in back to school season, about protecting our kids online. I'm fighting with the battle of how do I keep my kids safe on watches and phones and tablets and Nintendo Switches and social engineering. There's so much to cover as parents trying to keep our kids safe in a digital world. And I'm bringing in some people that I really trust who have also wrestled through it, because I feel like this is something we want to share. Not a lot of business involved in that, mostly just useful stuff and kind of a battle that I'm fighting that I want to kind of share in. Week after, or a couple weeks after that, I'm hoping to have Josh from All Things Secured on to talk about the same topic. If you've ever watched any of Josh's stuff on All Things Secured, he's got incredible content around FIDO keys and personal privacy, VPNs, privacy online, deleting your data. His YouTube site is full of great content as well. And so hopefully we'll be able to get him on. I'm really excited to connect with him on the same topic of privacy and taking care of when we talk about kids and the internet, we got to talk about privacy, about best practices around that. And I think the social engineering thing scares me more than the content on the internet side does with kids. So lots of interesting stuff coming up, but always fun to chat with you guys. Appreciate all of you who listened in. We had a few people on LinkedIn Live, which was fun. And we'll catch you on the next one. And thanks again, Nick. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Take care.